something told me that I was glimpsing the future. This very powerful woman, I mean, she is Emeritus Secretary of State of the United States of America, this esteemed and extremely accomplished jurist. Yeah, that's Clarence Thomas who I'm talking about. And what do they have to say when they're huddled in the green room at a conference honoring Thomas Sowell? How can we get people to take more seriously the public imperative of preparing young Black kids in poverty to compete on a level playing field in this society? That's the future. Anyway, okay, so we're live at the Glenn Show. We're going to have a conversation today. We're going to be talking about all kinds of stuff. The big deal for me over the last 6 months has been the lead up to and the culmination of and consummation of the conference honoring the great African-American economist and public intellectual Thomas Sowell of the Hoover Institution at Stanford University, 95 years old, and the author of 40 books and an iconic figure, both as a scholar of social inequality, race, and ethnicity, and also as a commentator on public affairs from a libertarian conservative perspective. Tom Sowell has been around for a half century in American public life and is someone who has inspired me in his determined, heroic advocacy of point of view about public affairs and about race that is anathema to the conventional liberal mind. And I was very blessed to have been asked by Condoleezza Rice, the director of the Hoover Institution, former Secretary of State, African-American woman of some considerable stature, to co-organize the conference honoring Thomas Sowell. I worked with Stephen Davis, an economist who is director of research at the Hoover Institution, and the two of us put together a 2-day program that invited scholars, of course, to make remarks and present their research relevant to the corpus of work that Tom Sowell accumulated over the course of a half century, as well as other figures who were influenced by or who made use of the work of Thomas Sowell in their own writing and commentary, illustrating the reach that Tom has had in terms of commentary on public affairs. It went off with great success at Stanford. And I'm happy now to be able to bask in the afterglow of what was a very successful event. I must say, leading up to it, I was anxious. I was quaking in my boots, concerned about whether or not the remarks that I would have to make, and I gave 2 lectures. One, a kind of mini keynote setting the stage. I was the second person to speak in the morning program of the first day after Justice Clarence Thomas was being interviewed for an hour by Peter Robinson, who is a Hoover affiliate, who hosts a podcast and program called Uncommon Knowledge, which is an interview show that Peter Robinson does very, very well with esteemed guests and so forth and so on. Anyway, Peter Robinson in conversation with Justice Thomas. And then the stage was mine to frame the proceedings to come over the next 2 days in the language and the register of an economist, Thomas Sowell's Economics. And I gave a lecture in that spirit. And on day 2, in a panel that I shared with great satisfaction with my former student and colleague, co-author, and good friend, Roland Fryer, a panel that was devoted to the significance of Thomas Sowell's research on culture and inequality. I gave a lecture there that attempted to comprehensively review the contributions that Sowell has made in the economics of cultural influences on social outcomes. And Roland gave a very nice talk on his research on hip hop and the extent to which it's changed over the decades and how that might have or might not have impacted on behavioral outcomes in African American communities. But in any case, I gave 2 talks. So it was a big deal. It was a big deal for me. It was a big deal for me because I deeply respect the legacy of Thomas Sowell and was honored, really almost beyond measure, to have been asked to shepherd in the assemblage of dignitaries. I should mention that in addition to Justice Clarence Thomas, Kimmy Badenoch, the woman, Black woman, African descendant woman, who is head of the Tories, the Conservative Party in the United Kingdom, flew in from London in order to sit on a 90-minute panel discussing the influence that Tom Sowell's writing has had from her perspective on the discussion of racial issues in the United Kingdom. And there were other, very prominent people, some of whom are affiliated with Hoover, some of whom not, who contributed to the proceedings. And yes, I was honored to have been asked to play that kind of organizing role. Important to me for a number of reasons, both, as an economist, I felt that I was being handed the responsibility of as a custodian, in a way, of Sowell's intellectual legacy of framing and giving voice to the appreciation that Hoover Institution wanted to express for the contributions that Thomas Sowell has made over the years. Those contributions are considerable. And I was also, in a way, chastened a bit by the responsibility of giving voice to what Sowell has actually done in his life. I mean, conservative, Black conservative. How much of a Black conservative is Glenn Loury? Well, the person could raise a question about that, and people have raised questions about it. And what role does race play in the self-understanding of an intellectual who happens to descend from slaves? Sowell, in the excellent biography by Jason Riley, Maverick, and in his own voice, Sowell's own voice, in his autobiography, A Personal Odyssey. Sowell he's from North Carolina, born in North Carolina in Jim Crow segregation in 1930, brought up in Harlem in poverty, educated at Columbia, Harvard, and the University of Chicago. Started as a Marxist, a devoted follower of Karl Marx, Das Kapital, but evolving into a free market economist and a follower of Friedrich von Hayek. As I say, author of 40 books. That's a lot. That's a book every 15 months for a half century. And believe me, that's an act that's going to be very, very hard to follow. A prodigious footprint, column at Forbes magazine, which he was writing on, I think, a biweekly basis, and doing that while he was doing everything else that he was doing. Acerbic, biting commentary, often from the right of center, devoted in his way to African-American striving, but in complete opposition to the conventional wisdom of the civil rights establishment and the liberal cognoscenti about what African Americans should be doing. A believer in the essential imperative of liberty, of personal responsibility. A person who thought that, well, civil rights legislation may be necessary, and certainly it's a political imperative and nobody is going to stop it, but it's not the answer. The answer is development. The answer is skills. The answer is make yourself useful, fit in someone else wants to pay to do something, and you'll solve the problem. Discrimination doesn't explain all of the disparities. A believer that culture, values, attitudes, beliefs, practices, norms, expectations, structures of family, institutions within communities, not government, has a lot of the answers to the questions that people concerned about the fortunes of the disadvantaged, the poor, the excluded, the minority, the underdog. People concerned about those fortunes can find answers in the development of productivity, of the achieving the potential of the market. Anyway, I go on perhaps a bit too long here, but this is Thomas Sowell, and I was asked to curate this legacy for the purpose of the Hoover Institution's 2-day celebration. Now, I was asked to do this as a distinguished visiting fellow at the Hoover Institution, but I was also asked to do it, I dare say, if I dare say, asked by Condoleezza Rice to do this, if I dare say, because I am, in some sense, following in the footsteps of Thomas Sowell, both as a conservative and as an African American and as a first-rate economist. I mean, I'm not going to toot my own horn here, except to say that in the same way that Thomas Sowell venerated excellence and looked to the bottom line of productivity and engagement with the frontier of one's discipline as the currency of the realm, so I have, in my own way, proven my bona fides by exhibiting that currency in my own research portfolio. Trained at MIT in the 1970s, first Black professor at Harvard University in the 1980s, going on to a 14-year career at Boston University as a very productive scholar, publishing in the frontline journals, evolving into a public intellectual with his own acerbic tone, critical of conventional African-American liberal nostrums in the arts, developing a podcast with a big reach, such as the one that you are now taking part in, and so on. I felt it was a kind of confirmation to be asked to play this role in this conference. And so there you are, Glenn Loury. I'm not going to say being handed the mantle. I'm not going to write another 40 books before the thing is up. But Glenn Loury, a custodian in a way of a precious legacy. And I was humbled and honored to have been asked to do so. I see that Clifton Duncan is in the picture here. Hey.
Yeah. So there's this big event that's honoring this major intellectual. As you say, it's honoring his legacy. We're talking about legacy. We're talking about the past. But I want to know if you were able to glean anything about where things are going in the future from, because it's not, it's not Sowell. And if I understand it, I don't even think Sowell was there in person, which is not that surprising given his reputation. Was he there?
He did not show up in the room. He did do an interview live to tape with Peter Robinson, some segments of which were broadcast for the assembled magnitudes during the conference. And I understand that he had a live feed. And so from the comfort of his bedroom or wherever he might have been reposed, he was observing the proceedings, but he was not in the room. No.
Yeah. Not that surprising given his reputation.
Well, you want to know about the future? I'll tell you about the future. Amongst the many wonderful things at this conference, was the presentation of awards for an essay contest, which was organized by the Hoover Institution on the occasion of this conference, inviting young people high school and college-aged young people to contribute short, 1,500-word pieces that celebrated in one way or another the ideas, the influence of Thomas Sowell. And the contributors came from all over the world. They came from Latin America, they came from Europe, they came from North America, and so on. And there were two winners, both of whom were young Asian men. Uh, and there's I don't have a problem with that. This is not a complaint. This is an observation about where the future lies. And the future lies, of course, in the small world that we are entering into, and the universality of the ideas that Sowell championed, and so forth. But that's just a kind of, I think, interesting indication of this future. I'll tell you this, man. I'm walking from I was on the program, of course, because I was one of the organizers. So I had access to the green room, which means I had access to the green room bathroom, which as Robert Patton Sproul will be quick to tell you, for a guy of our age, I'm older than Bob, but that's okay. It's good to be able to take a leak, when you need to take a leak. So I'm in the green room doing what I need to do, and I walk out, and they're sitting in the corner, huddled, whispering to one another, are Condoleezza Rice, Black woman, former Secretary of State of the United States of America, and Clarence Thomas, Justice Thomas, Black man, senior member of the United States Supreme Court. They were huddled. And I'm walking by, and I don't want to interrupt, so I'm trying to, get back to my seat. And Condi says, "Glenn, have a seat." So I have a seat. And I said, what y'all talking about? And it turns out they're talking about education of poor people in East Palo Alto, California, and the role that Stanford is playing in facilitating that education. And Justice Thomas makes the following remark. He says, "We have yet to have a case in which the petitioners are trying to protect their right to take race into account as they deliver educational services to poor people. We've had a case where they want to take race into account as they deliver educational opportunities to the elite at the institutions of higher education. But nobody has come before us and asked for, in effect, the blessing of the court on behalf of a program of enhancing the education of poor Black kids." Now, he says, they get our blessing. I paraphrase here. I'm not quoting Justice Thomas, and I certainly don't speak for him. They get our blessing because that's a compelling state interest, says the great Clarence Thomas, senior member of the United States Supreme Court, who everybody's prepared to dismiss because he doesn't agree with Ketanji Brown Jackson about students for fair admissions cases on affirmative action at Harvard and the University of North Carolina. But what they need to know is that A, the Constitution comes first for him, and B, he's as interested as any one of his detractors in promoting the interest of educating poor Black kids so they have an opportunity to compete on the merits under a race-neutral meritocracy. But in any case, I'm saying something told me that I was glimpsing the future. This very powerful woman, I mean, she is Emeritus Secretary of State of the United States of America. This esteemed and extremely accomplished jurist. Yeah, that's Clarence Thomas who I'm talking about. And what do they have to say when they're huddled in the green room at a conference honoring Thomas Sowell? How can we get people to take more seriously the public imperative of preparing young Black kids in poverty to compete on a level playing field in this society? That's the future.
Now, knowing you as I do, I know that this conversation that you observed kind of fits into an idea that you've been working with. We're not going to have time to go into it here today, but I just want to put it on the table for the future. Thick meritocracy. Am I right? Formation.
You know you're right, Mark. You know you're right. Because you and I have been having a side conversation about this very topic, and it is something I have been asked to contribute an essay to a collection of scholarly papers that's being organized by my friend Stephen Durloff, who is professor of economics at the University of Chicago. That'll be published in the Annals of the American Academy of Political and Social Science, the Annals, next year. And my commentary on meritocracy is to introduce and then try to explain this distinction between thick and thin meritocracy. Now, to be brief, because we don't want to spend all our time on this, but the idea is that there is selection and there is formation. Selection is I have positions, fewer than there are applicants, and I have to decide among the applicants who gets the position. So I'm selecting. Formation is the applicants will be presenting certain more or less meritorious characteristics. They will score this high on the test. They will have this kind of resume, these letters of recommendation. We will do interviews and they will be more or less impressive. They will have accomplished this or that previous accomplishment, all of which are to be weighed in the balance in assessing their merit. And the idea of meritocracy, thinly understood, is the insistence that when we apportion the scarce positions amongst the more than can be satisfied number of applicants, we do so based on the criterion of giving the positions to those who have the greatest accomplishment, somehow objectively assessed. Objectively assessed in the sense that the assessment does not turn on the identity of the people who are applying, not their race, their ethnicity, their connections, but rather their qualification. We use qualification to judge who gets the position. That's thin meritocracy. But we don't inquire under thin meritocracy about the processes of formation, about the social influences, the background opportunities, the institutional enhancements that abetted the acquisition of the meritorious characteristics. That is something we take as a given. That's thin meritocracy. Thick meritocracy recognizes that when we are at that final stage of selection and we are facing these applicants of varied quality, that the formation of those qualities is itself a social artifact. It's not a fact of nature. It's not simply based upon their IQ, their abilities, their talents, or their effort. It's also based upon the extent to which they did or did not have access to all of those social influences that abet the acquisition of skill. Thick meritocracy takes seriously the fact that it's a dynamic program that one has to execute in finally choosing who to bless with the scarce positions that are being allocated, and wants to level the playing field to some extent that's feasible. These are not easy. These are difficult problems, but takes the responsibility of inquiring into the processes that are preludes to the actual contest of selection, takes that seriously, and promotes the development of talent as well as adjudicates the allocations of talent. And my essay is an argument for thick meritocracy, especially in a racially divided society. Because you see, race is not just the marker on the color of the skin. Race is a social artifact as well. It's something that's being produced and reproduced through choices that people are making about affiliation, including intimate affiliation. It governs the access that people have to those institutional portals where conventional qualification and skills are acquired or are not acquired. In a society with our history, we don't want to forget that history. Even though we are in an age where DEI is verboten to speak of, we don't want to forget the history because we didn't just get here yesterday. Speaking of that history is not some kind of a backward, critical race theoretic diversion away from freedom. Speaking of that history is taking ourselves and our conditions sufficiently seriously to not be one note ideological, monomaniacal, but to be subtle in our custodianship of the institutions that distribute opportunity amongst our people, aware of the processes through which historical inequality grounded in unjust action are being reproduced in our own time, and so on and so forth. So I go on too long, I'm sure, but that's the idea.
And we will, I know we will be hearing a lot more about this idea and kind of what you're planning to do with it going forward. But for now, we've got with us Clifton Duncan, the multi-hyphenate talent, who is working hard at work on a one-man show about Thomas Sowell and many other things. And we figured it'd be a perfect opportunity to get him on the stream. So go to it, you guys.
Hey, Clifton, how you doing?
Mr. Laurie, always a pleasure to see you. Thanks for inviting me on.
And thanks for making the trek to Palo Alto to be in the audience and to contribute your spirit as well as your voice in the conversations that went on off camera at the Thomas Sowell celebration. I thought it was great to have you out there. What you think, man? How did the event strike you? I'm curious to know.
Well, it was great to be out there, and it's funny because I thought I made a long trip, and then of course Kimmy Badenoch shows up, and she literally flew in from across the world, and then got right out of there. She had a hard out. It was interesting for me just because I take pride in that I was one of the younger people in the room, maybe one of the more liberal people in the room, but also one of the few, if only, artists in the room. It was very humbling in terms of being around so many great minds. I remember, I met Roland Fryer actually, and and a gentleman named Ian Rowe introduced us, and it's just like, everyone's like, I've graduated from all these vaunted institutions, and I've published this many books, and I write for this publication, and I've done this amount of research and published in this journal, and it's like, well, I'm an actor, I've done some Broadway, and now I'm doing this thing. And you definitely get a sense of your own your sense of self-importance definitely gets rearranged just a little bit in those kinds of situations. But it was absolutely a privilege, and it's not every day that you can say to yourself, well, actually, I exchanged laughs with a sitting Supreme Court justice, and I actually spoke to Justice Thomas very briefly, much to the chagrin of people who were waiting to meet him. And I encouraged him to. He's very loquacious. He loves. It's so strange because for me, this is a man whom they've been trying to destroy for almost as long as I've been alive. And to actually meet him and to hear, he has this wonderfully sonorous laugh that just cuts through cuts through all the sound and all the noise. And, I encouraged him. I said, Justice Thomas, you should probably just learn to rap. Just start learning to rap, and then you can reach the next generation of individuals. But
what did he say to that?
Oh, he laughed.
Yeah, he laughed. Yes, he laughed.
So, it was a very remarkable experience. And I took away, it was very inspiring on 3 different levels. And, for one, I heard an anecdote from Eli Steele, the son of the great Black intellectual Shelby Steele. And to me, it sort of exemplifies sort of who Sowell is in a big way. He told me about he was moving house at some point, and the movers showed up at about 2 p.m. and he would not let them in for another 4 hours because he would not allow his work to be interrupted. So to me, the sort of, I'll say the selfishness in terms of when you are engaged in great work and in serious work, protect your time, protect your process, commit to your work and commit to yourself. The second thing that I took away from that was listening to Justice Thomas, as a matter of fact, when he gave this very moving anecdote. This is a person who is 2 generations removed from chattel slavery. And, the interesting thing about being I guess you'd say more of a heterodox, a black person. I certainly wouldn't call myself an intellectual by any means, but there is a certain amount of guff, a certain amount of reputational violence, shall you say, that you would endure. And you know, Justice Thomas was talking about how his parents and his grandparents, I mean, they've endured far worse. My grandparents have endured far worse than slander on Twitter. And then someone like Tom Sowell, Dr. Sowell, has endured these kinds of public attacks, these lacerating attacks for the better part of 50 years. And I was listening to Dr. Victor Davis Hanson give some great anecdotes, and I was sort of reading between the lines of some of this stuff. And so the amount of the stalwartness, the toughness, the resilience, and saying they're going to come at me no matter what, but I'm going to keep continuing. And I got a sense that even though Dr. Sowell and others put on a brave face in public in the midst of these attacks, there is some wounding going on in private. But if they do draw blood, you never let them see you bleed. And so that sort of courage and having that kind of spine and a heart of steel in a way was also inspiring. And then I think the last thing for me that was really, really powerful was that the rigorous commitment to the truth lasts longer than a lifetime. I met those two Asian boys you were talking about, and it was funny because I shook their hands and congratulated them, and they were like, "Man, I just get to meet all these people I watch online." I was like, "Yeah, dude, me too. It's great." And and it's very heartening to see, because I too am deeply concerned about the future for a variety of reasons. But I do think it's interesting that, and I said this when on my last appearance on your show, I said this to John mostly, but he was expressing some concern. He said, this is not a world I recognize anymore. And I said, well, that's because I think the civil rights vision, as Tom Sowell might have called it, or the liberal order that we've been under for the past 60 years, I think is really coming apart, disintegrating, and something new is emerging, for better or for worse. And what I'm encouraged by is that Tom Sowell's work and his ideas, to say nothing of his scholarly contributions, are really beginning to, I wouldn't even say catch fire, but maybe sort of resurge or reemerge into the public consciousness. And that, to me, this is a man who's been publishing since the 1960s, for heaven's sake. And now to see his ideas really, really begin to catch on with younger people, I think it's just it's a testament to the rigor and the integrity and the honesty and almost the ruthlessness that with which he's attacked his work for all this time. And despite all the attacks, and despite him being minimalized and marginalized in these institutions, I stick by what I said last time on your show, which is that he is the people's intellectual. And his work has resonated with so many people, and it will continue to for as long as anybody listening to this or watching this will live, and far beyond that. So that was very gratifying, and just again to be in a room with all of these people and having this experience together was really really quite remarkable. I'm still not sure. My life makes no sense. I can't believe it happened, but yet here we are. Here I am, and it absolutely did.
Glad to be a part of it, Clifton. One of the lines in my sort of mini keynote that I gave after Justice Thomas's interview that I'm most proud of is in the conclusion, when I referred to this weathering the storm that for decades that Sowell has had to do under the judgmental, dismissive, excommunicative reaction to his conservatism. I speak of his majestic, dogged stoicism. And there's something really spiritually profound in it, in my view. His, you don't hear him complaining. You just see the fruit of his labor. He doesn't deviate left or right. I mean, and I can speak to this because I have deviated left and right under the storm of ostracism and social condemnation for my views, and I haven't always held the line, and I'm not proud of that. I'm a human being. So it's Thomas Sowell, but he somehow managed to hold the line. But I want to ask you before you go, Clifton, you're an artist, as you say. What inspiration for the art that you are involved in producing now, relevant to Thomas Sowell, did you find yourself drawing from the experience of attending this conference?
Oh, simple. Again, it's just the ruthless commitment to the process and to your work. I say all the time that a timeless work of art is something that rings with the truth. Fortunately, Tom Sowell's work also rings with truth. And, I think that a lot of artists get a bad rap, and it's not undeserved. In fact, one of my favorite parts of the ceremony was when she used to be Ion Hirsi Ali, but now she's Ion Ferguson, and she mentioned how we're listening to a bunch of actors now, and yet she follows me. She follows me on Twitter. Little does she know that there was an actor sitting just a few feet in front of her. And so I sort of ribbed her about not all actors, hashtag not all actors, but she wasn't wrong. But even the great artists. I wrote an article the other day on my Substack called "The State of the Arts" about Ernest Hemingway, who would get up every morning, at 6 a.m. and get right down to his writing station. He wouldn't sit down to work. He would always be standing up, and when the work was going really well, he's sweating feverishly, and sometimes he'd have to walk away if the characters that were in his head were really speaking to him. He'd have to kind of ruminate on that for a little bit, and and then the work would finish and he would stop before he was actually done for the day, so he wouldn't be totally spent. But it was just the amount of discipline and structure, the amount of rigor with which he attacked his work. For any artist or great intellectual, if they're not working, it's almost like death. And so again, in any great work that you undertake, there's a dedication and a commitment. And again, I think of that story about the movers. It's like, dude, you're not coming in here. I have this to finish. I cannot have my focus unbroken, and that's the mark of any person who's doing great work, whether their work is creative or it's corporate or it's intellectual. And again, for me as an artist, it's just it's just a gift to be reminded of that. And again, you see the fruits of that kind of labor and that kind of focus, and it's like, all right, man. All right, you gotta step up yourself, and especially if you're working on a piece that's inspired by the life and the work of someone like Dr. Sowell. Well, you got to really put in the hours now. So, I came back with just I walked out of that auditorium with a renewed sense of drive and purpose, and again, I'm honored to have been one of the only, if not the only, artist in there who was allowed to be a beneficiary of these kinds of stories and this kind of inspiration. And I have you to thank for that, Mr. Laurie, of course. And it's just an honor and a privilege. So it's just great, man. I feel really good.
Well, I'm happy to have contributed in a small way to what I think is going to be, and not to put any pressure on you unduly,
it's already there.
and a very important work of art that is in the process. Clifton Duncan, thank you very much.
Wait. Hold on 1 second. Clifton, I'm sure that our audience is curious about this. So why don't you let us know where we can follow your work and find out what you're up to and read your writing?
Sure.
So you can find me, if you want to see the more acerbic side of me, you can follow me on X or AKA Twitter. I mean, I still call it Twitter. I don't know why. I should be pressured to call it X, but it's at Clifton A. Duncan. You can read it on the screen right there. I also have a Substack/newsletter, which recently moved into the top 50 in cultural publications on the Substack, which I'm very happy to say. But it's called The State of the Arts. I've sort of rebranded recently in terms of, it offers cultural commentary on Sundays, but also artist commentary on Fridays. Right? So for endless inspiration to your inbox, please become a patron of The State of the Arts. As far as I have another publication called Becoming Thomas Sowell. That's at becomingsoul.substack.com, where I'm tracking the progress and the development of the show. My last post was about, this is what the show is going to be about. But I recently had a revelation after talking to you and John, actually, Glenn, that I was working on 2 shows, not one, but now I've refocused on the original project, which was the solo play. And for those curious about the project itself, last year I crowdfunded. I started the crowdfunder because in the past I was like, guys like Paul Robeson and Thurgood Marshall have been the recipients of one-person shows that have been performed in the past. And so I had this idea about what about Tom Sowell? And I asked initially for about $10,000, just to take some time off and maybe write and do some research and put out a draft. And we ended up raising 15 times that amount, which has afforded me the opportunity to really take my time and absorb this massive body of work. I mean, I was just up the other night. I popped open finally Knowledge and Decisions, and I was like, "Ooh, this is a hefty meal. I'm going to have to savor this one. This is a good one." But from where I'm at right now, the play is finally emerging, and we're going to set it in the late 1960s, which is the most tumultuous time in his life. And we're going to jump around from period to period, and we'll see who pops up. Milton Friedman might show up, maybe Malcolm X or MLK might show up within the play. But it's a very exciting process, and the goal is I want the audience to walk away with the feeling that they've just spent an intimate evening with Tom Sowell, and that's the main goal. The only issue is that you're going to have to find a way to. I'm still doing research. I'm interviewing off the record Victor Davis Hanson in a few weeks to kind of get more of the skinny on who he is in private, because I want to get to the emotional core of the person. But it's a privilege to be able to do it, and I have my backers to thank for the opportunity. And I've learned so much, and I'm learning so much right now. And as I said to you in person, Mr. Laurie, the play is finally beginning to emerge, and it's really, really an exciting process. So again, you can go to cliftonduncan.substack.com for the state of the arts, or you can go to becomingsoul.substack.com to follow Becoming Thomas Sowell, and we'll see you there.
Fantastic. Mark, what's next?
All right. Well, we'd already you kind of mentioned that you gave these talks. So, I what did you talk about? You gave a major address. I mean, you're talking 40 books. That's incomprehensible to me that someone could write that amount. And I know that you set yourself the task of, if not reading all of them, then going through a lot of them in preparation for writing this major address. So can you just talk about that a little bit? What'd you say?
I told a joke we had a little postmortem session at the end of the 2 days. Stephen Davis and I sat up on stage and made comments about what we took from the proceedings. And I made reference to my struggle to prepare, because it's an awesome responsibility. No, I didn't read all 40 books. I had read some of them prior thereto. I reread the big books like Knowledge and Decisions, which is his magnum opus theoretical reflection on the philosophy of market information and freedom in the production of a coordinated and orderly execution of economic activity under the reality of limited resources and cross-cutting incentives and dispersed information. This is Knowledge and Decisions. It is inspired. Knowledge and Decisions is by Friedrich von Hayek's classical essay, which the title of which escapes me at the moment, but it's something like the uses of information in economic activity. It was published in the American Economic Review, roughly 1945, and became a staple in first-year PhD program economic theory curriculum. And Sowell took that essay, which he first encountered when he was a graduate student under Milton Friedman's tutelage at the University of Chicago in the early 1960s, and expanded the idea into a magnum opus, a really a masterpiece of social analysis, where he expanded on Hayek's ideas in a number of different directions, enriched and deepened arguments that you don't want planning you don't want central control over the allocation of resources, because the planner doesn't have everything that needs to be known in order to discharge that responsibility in a efficient and orderly manner. However, the functions of markets, the functioning of markets can discharge that responsibility remarkably. So this is a insight of Adam Smith in the classical work, The Wealth of Nations, from the 18th century, but it is reiterated and magnified by Hayek, and in his way by Sowell, who goes beyond Hayek's reach, Knowledge and Decisions. I had read that book previously, but reread it with great interest and was inspired by it. Ethnic America, which was published roughly 1980. It is a history of ethnicity and the making of the amalgamated American society of mid-late 20th century out of the flows of various immigrant streams from Ireland and from Eastern Europe and from Latin America and from Asia and from Africa, of course. Not immigrants from Africa, mainly descendants of slaves in the case of the African heritage, but a contrast and comparison and analytical engagement with the histories of these various ethnic groups. Sowell has produced masterful trilogies. He writes books 2 and 3 and 4 at a time. One of those trilogies is called Race and Culture, Migrations and Cultures, and Conquests and Cultures, in which he is engaged in the project of chronicling the ways in which culture, and these are practices, values, beliefs, attitudes, orientations, norms, the institutions that are embedded within social life that shape individuals and influence their preferences and condition the way in which they react to the opportunities that confront them, ways in which cultures factor in the relative prosperity of groups within a nation and of nations across the global landscape. I engaged those books in my commentary. I couldn't go very deeply into what he argues there, but gave some examples there too. Another trilogy of Thomas Sowell's is A Conflict of Visions, The Vision of the Anointed, and The Quest for Cosmic Justice. These are 3 books, all of which are about intellectuals. There's intellectuals in society. That's a 4th one that one could add to this compendium, in which he explores the different presuppositions and fundamental assumptions that inform social analysis as undertaken by intellectuals from left or right, in A Conflict of Visions, which lays down the framework that is elaborated in subsequent entries into this collection of books. He distinguishes between what he calls the constrained and the unconstrained vision of the human condition. The unconstrained vision is basically open to the idea that social reform can solve all problems if only pursued with sufficient determination. That is a question of getting the rules right. We can eliminate poverty. We can eliminate homelessness. We can deal with criminal behavior. We can eliminate war. We just haven't yet gotten the right set of reforms. We haven't had the revolution. We haven't had the Reformation. We need to simply redouble our efforts at making society right, and these matters will take care of itself. And Sowell is very doubtful about that position, which he ascribes to Rousseau and Godkin and Rawls and other writers in between, of this is the socialist vision. This is the vision of we collectivize the control over our property rights. We can eliminate poverty. He's very doubtful about that vision. A constrained vision captured in his maxim: there are no solutions, only trade-offs. There are no solutions, there are only trade-offs, meaning you have to consider the cost of any intervention that you undertake as well as calculate on its benefits, meaning good intentions are not enough. You have to actually look at the consequences of what it is that you advocate be done, meaning every benefit comes at the expense of what it is that's foregone while you're doing the thing that you're doing. This is the constrained vision of human nature. No, man is not infinitely malleable. No, you can't, by fixing society, eliminate the fact that there will be members of society who are belligerent, who are violent, who are selfish, who are greedy, who are contemptuous of the rights of their fellow persons. And as a consequence, you need institutions to deal with those people. No, you're not going to eliminate war, because the state of nature in which the international community exists is one in which nations will indeed be belligerent, in which they will indeed attempt to impose their will upon others and so on. And hence, the constrained condition in which we live is one in which we need to take seriously the responsibility to deter the aggression, etc. Disarmament, with a world in which there are no weapons, is a pipe dream. This is the kind of idea promoted by the constrained vision, which so contrasts with the unconstrained vision. Which distinction between constrained and unconstrained informs his book? The vision of the anointed informs his book, A Conflict of Visions, and so on. Steven Pinker, the psychologist at Harvard and author of a number of big books, The Language Instinct being one of them, The Blank Slate being another of them, and most recently, his new book Steven Pinker's new book is about common knowledge. He calls it When Everybody Knows That Everybody Knows. And I could go into that, but we're not talking about Steven Pinker here. But he gave the luncheon address on day one. And his topic was to expand upon Sowell's distinction between constrained and unconstrained visions through the lens of Pinker, the psychologist's view about the reality of human nature as a constraint upon social order. That is Pinker, and that is an indication of the reach of Sowell's work on this philosophical and political theoretic, not social scientific plane with the conflict of visions. But this is the kind of thing that I was engaged in giving a broad gauge review of in my remarks about Sowell and his intellectual footprint. Is that responsive to you, Mark?
Yeah, I think you got it. I feel like we got like half the talk in that one. But there's another part of this. I want to take a few minutes more on this, because I have an additional question. But first, I want to get to we'll do this first, then we'll get to our super chat in a second. But so all right, so this is your endorsement of a certain perspective and a certain kind of philosophical position that Sowell is occupying, representing, expanding, etc. But I don't imagine, and in fact, it wouldn't really be a fitting tribute to Sowell if things were this way, that you agree that you're in lockstep with him. I mean, there must be points of disagreement between you and Sowell. You have, as you pointed out, kind of different paradigms, different economic paradigms that you're operating out of, different methodological sort of backgrounds to your work. So, like, where are the points of disagreement that you found, if any, when you're kind of going through this project?
Well, you touch on two of them. One of them is methodological and the other is ideological or philosophical. As far as methodology is concerned, and my head is off to Thomas Sowell, who is a historian and a chronicler through a careful examination of social and political and economic history of the experiences of peoples throughout the world. But he's not a quantitative, analytically rigorous social scientist. He's a discursive, a broad gauge, synthetic. You read his books, and his books read like a historian or historical sociologist books. They have a lot of detail about specific circumstances, which he uses to weave together into a narrative that serves his message, whatever the book may be. In Ethnic America, he talks about the groups. He talks about the Irish. He talks about the Jews. He talks about the Italians. He talks about the Slavs. He talks about, quote, the Blacks. And he will characterize their experiences through anecdotal and idiosyncratic descriptive narrative. I'm a theorist. I'm an economic theorist trained at MIT in the late 20th century. And I'm a formalist. I approach my research projects in terms of, well, let's see if we cannot identify the principal, minimal, skeletal forces that are at play and can't formally represent them with mathematical specificity, developing models and then analyzing those models, and then drawing lessons from that analysis, which we can then go back to more empirical evidence to see whether or not those lessons are generating insight. So there's a methodological difference between us. And again, I say hats off to the guys that write the big books. I write the more compact 25-page Journal of Political Economy, Quarterly Journal of Economic Papers. I don't write the 500-page tomes with 1,000 footnotes that are the result of archival and close study of the texts of others who've done that kind of research. That's a difference of intellectual style. On the philosophical point, I was asked after my mini keynote on the first day. I was the first person to speak after Justice Clarence Thomas's interview, which started the program. And I was meant to set the stage for Thomas Sowell, the economist. And I was asked, well, what's the major point of difference between you two? That's what you just asked me, Mark, in terms of Thomas Sowell, the economist. And I observed that Sowell was educated at the University of Chicago in the spirit and the tradition of price theory, of free market reverent analysis of human behavior in terms of laissez-faire, in terms of quiet confidence in the ability of free associating individuals left to their own devices to work out the problems of social interaction in a beneficial manner. And this is Hayek. We don't need planning. The market will take care of things. This is, people may not know who I'm talking about. These are people who are figures in the University of Chicago pantheon. Ronald Coase. Coase's idea is that if you have externalities, this is a market failure where people are producing social costs. That is, all the costs are not actually accounted for in the market. Pollution being one of them, noise being another of them. My neighbor plays his stereo too loud that I cannot avoid hearing. He doesn't take into account the fact that he's disturbing me when he turns on his stereo. There's no market where the neighbor can buy from me the right to disturb my sleep by turning up his stereo. He just does it. He's going to play his music too loud unless somebody intervenes. And Coase argues that bargaining between me and the neighbor will substitute for often the beneficial consequences if there did exist a market in which my rights could be bought or sold with the neighbor, and the neighbor could be required to acquire my permission through a market transaction, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, I go on too long to make the point. They believe that things will work out okay if you just leave people to their own devices. People will find a way around it. Freedom will out. At the end of the day, spontaneous order will emerge. Now, I was trained in a different tradition at MIT, a tradition that thought that you needed regulations sometimes to compensate for the fact that markets are incomplete, that contracts can't be written for everything, that the information that needs to inform efficient allocation of resources is not always available, that there are people who are in positions of market power, so that the implications of the competitive paradigm that freely interacting agents seeking their own interests will, as if led by an invisible hand in the language of Adam Smith, come to a commodious resolution of the social problems, that can not always be counted upon. And people like Paul Samuelson, who was the founder of the school at MIT that I was trained in, and Robert Solow, who was his close colleague and co-author, and Peter Diamond, who was one of my dissertation advisors and a Nobel laureate student of information economics and public finance and so on, are taught that smart people who were respectful of the rights of individuals but aware of the limits of markets could improve upon the outcome of unlimited free interchange by devising interventions overseen by government through taxation and regulation that were leading toward a second best. A first best would be a world in which the omnipotent decision maker had all the information at hand and could simply dictate outcomes. But a second best is a world in which a well-informed and thoughtful intervener through regulation and whatnot, aware of the limits of markets, could improve upon market allocation. And, that first posture, that Chicago school posture, doesn't believe in fixing stuff. It believes that stuff will work out all right. And it believes that when you try to fix stuff, you make matters worse. And the stuff that you might be fixing could be the long-term consequences of the racial domination of the African-descended people who inhabit the population of the United States of America. And the things that are supposed to lead to that fixing could be things like, well, if they put up their bootstraps, they would be okay. Well, if they would only take advantage of the opportunities the way that the Jews or whomever had taken advantage of them, see, it can be done. You don't have to have a government hand leading you along in order to improve your status. Groups who have started with nothing have prospered in society. So too could be the Blacks. We don't need all of this regulation. That's a posture that is suggested and very compatible with the Chicago view of the world, and it's one that Thomas Sowell exemplified. And I don't completely share that view. I think that there could be poverty traps. I think there can be multi-generational influences where the consequences of historical exploitation and dispossession present themselves from one generation to the next, because not all of the action is in the marketplace. And even when the marketplace has itself become sanitized of the influences of racism through anti-discrimination laws or through the evolution of cultural norms within the larger society, even when the market is colorblind, with that we lived in such a world, but let's suppose that we do, even so, the consequences of not having always lived in such a world will present themselves and will be perpetuated through the private sector in ways that might occasion the attention of and intervention from the public sector. And I made reference to this difference in orientation, outlook, and confidence of reform in my remarks about Thomas Sowell.
Okay, great. Wow. So we've got some super chats that I want to put forward here, and they're related to what you've just been talking about. So first, we got one from Bo Cannington 6448. Bo, thank you so much for your contribution. Thank you so much for the super chat. And Bo asks, Professor, what, in your opinion, are some common intellectual errors that conservatives make when trying to understand leftist economic policies, such as those which might be forthcoming in New York City? Thank you. And then he follows up, Perhaps a marriage of Chicago and MIT economic thought would be ideal. Perhaps.